UFOs are actually something that these ETs generally are creating with their own consciousness. They manifest it based on kind of like blueprints that they can download. The internet is a very apt metaphor of what shared consciousness is like. We are moving into, when we move into the fourth density on Earth, we will have superhero powers. By comparison to where we are now, you will be able to levitate yourself, you'll be able to instantly manifest objects with your thought, you'll be able to travel through time, travel through space, you'll be able to provide for instantaneous healing, and there is telepathic communication, so there are no secrets anymore. Everyone's consciousness is unified, you can't hide anything from other people. That's a very profound, discontinuous shift from where we are now.
That leads into where ETs are at this moment, because they do have at least telepathic abilities, most of them,
right,
that are far advanced of most Earthlings, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely correct.
So that leaves us at a disadvantage, depending on what their agendas are. So maybe you could talk about that.
We are experiencing the Battle of Armageddon on this planet. It is not something that occurs in the future. The law of one philosophy is just one philosophy, which is based on what we call ageless wisdom or esoteric wisdom. And I'm not trying to say that this material is the only material that's any good. However, it is a fact, to my understanding, that most channeling that you see out there on the internet now, or in books for that matter, most of it is highly distorted. And the reason why is that there is a battle of Armageddon going on. It is not something that occurs right at the end of the age in the last few years before 2012. It's actually been occurring for thousands of years. And it's a battle between good ETs and bad ETs is one way to say it, even though good and bad is a very relative, subjective term. When we say good, we mean entities that are service to others oriented, meaning that their purpose is to help, to love, to create a unifying of people together in love. Entities on the service to self path believe that they are helping, believe that they are creating spiritual evolution, but they do it by interfering with you, by making you uncomfortable, making you unhappy, colliding with your free will. And they will try to invade a planet and conquer a planet. But they can't do that unless they have the desire of those planets' inhabitants to be conquered. That's a very important point. They have to have the free will mandate. The people have to say, yes, we want to be enslaved, we want to be taken over. That's why they can't just sweep into a planet and invade and take over. Now, so when you're dealing with evolution in the universe, it was very early in our creation that one of the galaxies represent the primordial creators. They basically set up a whole system of evolution of 22 archetypes, 22 basic experiences that every person on every planet will go through in that galaxy. And wherever you are now, there is a veil between the conscious mind and the superconscious mind. Meaning that you can consciously believe that God has abandoned you, that you have no connection to the universe. That is the seed of the negative path. The seed of the negative path is separation. The pain of feeling that God doesn't exist or God has abandoned you leads to you feeling like no one else has any value. When you start awakening to these laws of the cosmos, the radiant mind energy that's all over the cosmos, you then feel that you have become a God where none existed. And therefore everyone else is like insects compared to where you are. And that in order to enlighten them, you have to enslave them. That's the basis of the negative path. There are entities who believe this way who are higher evolved than human, higher evolved than the people on the planet at this time. And they are trying to come to this planet, trying to take over. However, those seventh density beings I spoke of before, known as the Guardians, their job is to create this wall of protection around the Earth, which is called a quarantine. And that basically ensures that, that they will never be able to invade. Now, because we as a planet are not uniformly positive. We have a blending of positive and negative influence. That means the average person may, on the one hand, say, I love you to their spouse, and then go and cheat on them with somebody else. Okay? A lot of people on this planet think of themselves as, they say, well, we're basically good people. We're all basically good at heart. In the Diary of Anne Frank, that famous line she says at the end, here she's been tortured by the Nazis, right? And she says, but I do believe that we're all really good at heart. Well, that's actually the problem, is that there are people who are doing very negative things who believe they're basically good at heart, and they're not dealing with the disconnect between the good part and the part that's hurting people. So you might have a guy who says, well, I love my wife and I support my family, but yet he's going out to strip bars or he's cheating on her with somebody else. When mass murderers and murderers in general have been interviewed when they're on death row, they don't say, I'm this terrible killer. They almost invariably will have justified the murder for whatever reason, even if it's people that they didn't know and they had no connection to. They will come up with some reason for why what they did was a good thing. So we as a planet are in a situation where we are doing negative things, but we're not aware that they're negative, and that's a major problem that we have. So as a result, we end up forcing ourselves to have these negative greetings, as they're called. We have these entities around us that could provide a perfect protection from negative entities interfering with our planet, if we had the mandate as a society to be only positive. But we don't. We're creating negative energy in our own lives, like by lying to people. That's a great example. If you can look somebody in the eye and know that you're not telling them the truth, but you're doing it basically for your own benefit, then in some small way you're sending some energy out there that will allow a negative greeting to happen in your own life, which means you might have bad karma. You might suddenly hit your head on the door and you're bleeding, and or it could also be something that happens to the whole planet. This is why we have corrupt government. This is why we have environmental degradation. This is why we have earth changes. The earth changes are actually very much like what the primitive society said. The earth is a living organism. If we were getting along harmoniously as a people, we would not be having earthquakes, we would not be having hurricanes, tornadoes, none of that stuff would be happening. It's a projection of our disharmony. And a great way that I saw that happen was during the Israel-Lebanon war last year. The tensions of everybody's mind got really, really tweaked out on the planet. And then there was a global heat wave. I mean, here in LA, it was horrible. You guys remember that? It was like I was lying there in bed because I didn't have air conditioning in my apartment in Santa Monica, and I was dying from the heat. And it was all over the place. It was Europe, it was Asia, it was North America, South America. Well, it was because everybody was freaked out that the Israel-Lebanon war could create World War III, Armageddon in the Middle East. There was this huge fear in the planet, and that stops the energy from flowing through the planet the way it should. It gets bottled up and creates this unusable heat, which causes us to have these earth changes. So these guardians, these seventh dimensional beings, again, create this bulletproof shield around the earth, but because we invite incursion by our negativity, there are certain random windows that will be opened, and that is mandated. Nobody knows when it will happen until it happens, but when they open, you get what's called a UFO wave or a saucer wave. Most of the UFOs that you see in the sky are negative entities. Most of the UFOs are negative. There are some that are positive, but the majority of them are the negative side. Doesn't mean they're going to hurt you necessarily. You will not be affected by these UFOs unless you have invited it in your own life by basically being overtly negative. So that's another good incentive to stay on the positive path and try to do the right thing for other people and try to be positive, supportive, uplifting, loving.
So how do you make sense of the fact that you've got people going through abduction scenarios like Jim Sparks, who you may not be familiar with personally, but who we heard speak and who's written a book called The Keepers, and who was conscious during his, experiences or contact experiences, however you want to frame it. And basically, he's being taught how to make the earth a better place. Mm-hmm. They're being shown, he says there are group abductions that he's seen, that they're being educated by these ETs to basically save the earth.
On this occasion, I was taken on board craft as an 8-year-old child in my summer pajamas, and the regression began with me actually being in a very large white room, white walls with a white warm marble-like floor, and there were a whole variety of other children there. So there were several human children along with myself, but there were also species of greys and mixtures of species, what you might call also transgenic children. We were there to learn to communicate with each other, and this was all done through the mind, not verbally. And obviously we had been doing this from a very early age, because during another regression, Mary actually took me back to when I was 6 months old and on board craft. So on this occasion, we were learning to communicate through playing games with the mind. So we could actually create, and this is quite hard for me to get my head around, but we were actually creating holograms in the air, which we would play with as children would play with physical toys. So that was a very interesting point, and I remember commenting on the colour of them, how bright and luminescent and complex the shapes were that we were creating.
Okay, that's a good question. This gets into this. We're in one of these gray areas, which is very strange, and that is that the positive side likes to call themselves the Confederation, and it's basically a group of 53 some odd civilizations that have all come together and that are basically acting as sort of like a celestial government for our little sector of the galaxy. Ra, the group that I've worked with, and it's in the Law of One series, is just one of the entities in the Confederation, one of many, of 53. Now they basically oversee what they call the management and transfer of planetary populations.